Henry, you recently have gone down the path of looking into some no code and low code tools. And I've been thinking a lot about there's this
Yes.
there's this common new refrain in Y Combinator's YouTube channel and like all this stuff that there's no excuse anymore for not creating an MVP, right? The tools are so good that you can click and drag to create UIs and all that stuff. And this idea that you can, like, even non-technical founders now can launch MVPs. Like, you don't need the technical jobs. Has that been your experience? And like, what is your thoughts around like the low code and no code tools of the day?
Yeah. I mean, I've been curious about low code solutions for almost 2 years at this point because I am non-technical. I want to be able to do it on my own. And I've still come up against a lot of obstacles in figuring out what considerations need to be made in terms of what's capable with low code tools. I even think about like building a website is not so easy as drag and drop. There are a lot of limitations. It's really tricky, I think, for most people to design a simple website as they would imagine with these kind of low
Yeah.
code, I don't know what you want to call them, but visual development almost. Um, I don't know. I feel like generally my statement on no code, low code is it's a lot of hype. It comes to an MVP, I can understand where you might be able to gain some traction with something that doesn't need to be fully built out with a
Yeah, totally.
100,000,
And
200,000,
the thing
you
I
know,
think about is
app from a studio.
so much of an app. This comes from a developer's perspective, right? So much of an app is it's a form and a list. It's a form and a dashboard. And I look at tools like Retool, Tally, Notion Sites, all that stuff, and think, oh, that's pretty cool that you can do those things, right? Like form, dashboard, you can do more complicated stuff, whatever. But I've never dove deep enough into them. Like, I always reach for the tool I know, which is like to write it all from scratch, which probably is not very efficient. And so I think to myself, oh, is this the future? Should I be looking into this stuff? And the parallel that I think about that with as well is stuff that's happening with LLMs, AI, like that's actually writing code for you. What are your thoughts and experience with those type of tools too? And do you see them as similar, different, like same amount of difficulty, easier? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't
Mm-hmm.
have any hands-on experience with the latest AI
Yeah.
coding tools like Claude or anything like that. I've been keeping one eye on them, but from what I can tell from a distance, it's not quite there. At least, bringing complex applications to life within minutes or days, probably not, there yet. I When I think about MVPs, almost equally important in my mind. Now, I will admit, maybe that is, a distraction or an artificial obstacle to actually proving out the venture, where an
Right.
MVP could just be proving that something works. It's a form and a list. But that second part, I feel like holds me up from using tools like Retool or Tally to build things because I need users to actually be comfortable enough
And
to
you feel
pay,
like you
to
couldn't get somebody
test
to
the
pay
service
for a
almost.
retool
At
app.
least that's something that crossed my mind. I just haven't seen it before. In my mind, it feels like it will be a janky experience. Like if I email you this link and then it pulls you into another tab in order to do a Stripe payment that then is going to
Mhm.
give you an email receipt from some other company, seems a little shoddy when then you get, an email with your login. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like building confidence and trust is really difficult as a startup. And that is the main obstacle when building an MVP, because what if, that friction alone makes it so that we can't
Mhm.
test our product? I'd
Yeah,
rather
that's
than build
interesting.
it all full stack and make it beautiful so that's
No,
an
I
obstacle.
think that's
Heard that
probably like a
before? Is
dominant
that,
opinion,
off the deep
right?
end?
And I think that may be why Retool has positioned itself not as build your
Okay.
startup's MVP and more build internal tools at your company, right? That's also because they're going for a B2B play, but that makes sense to me. I think there's also to our earlier
Yeah.
conversation about wanting kind of an ownership and like sense of style. Like you got opinions on how it should look and like how the UI really should work and all these things. And likely a lot of those like early opinions are wrong anyway. So maybe we should just adopt like the thing that might seem janky, but be janky in a standard way instead of janky in a custom way, because all MVPs have jank. There's also the element I feel of with stuff like Retool, Airtable, all these things, you might feel like it's very easy for customers to see what you're using behind the scenes, right? And like that might come with some worries about how that might affect their opinion of the tool. Is that at all like a part of your calculation?
Won't work with their target demographic. Like, maybe I'm crazy, but I just feel like this blanket advice of like, oh, low code, no code is great for every single venture. Probably not. Like, I don't know. It might be more narrow than people think. Like, I think those are some examples, but also if you were to make an Uber with low code, no code, you really want to have a janky version of people. Like, it's hard to say that because it's already established in the market, but I don't know if we can get creative with something else. But if you imagine the launch of Uber as not an app, but as a text message when your ride was there, okay, that solves the problem of being able to track where your driver is. We can't really build out a full Google Map API, but we can text you. It solves the problem. People aren't going to use that. Like, will that be able to get trust and adoption? I would say no. I think that you also is, I think,
even from knowing you personally, Henry,
when
have
I start thinking about it,
high bar for what you think of as an MVP, right?
This is my biggest struggle.
Yeah,
right. I'm admitting it.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, and I think
I'm here to play devil's advocate, but I think this is a hard thing.
You're thinking similarly to you, maybe not advice, but like an alternate perspective. If you thought less about like your MVP as a way of testing the entire like technology, you mentioned before, like there's the does it work and will people pay for it? If you like this part, you throw away and you just know that it's going to work, right? Will people pay for it becomes the thing that you're testing, the MVP you're testing. There's a lot of ways to get people to pay for a service, right? One of them is a concierge white glove approach, right? You go to a single company as basically a single consultant saying, I will give you this thing, this deliverable, this experience, whatever, for this price, whatever it is. And do you want to buy it? And then the technological part of this MVP becomes you building internal tools for yourself and this company to make that collaboration easier and more streamlined, which eventually becomes a product. There's like the whole, again, who knows how much of revisionist history is in this story, but DoorDash founders putting up website on college campus that says, we will deliver food for you from restaurants with a form. Again, just a form. People submit the form. And then DoorDash would call in people's orders. Literally, the founders of DoorDash would call people's orders, go to the restaurant, pick up the stuff, and drive it to them. Right? There was no technology around like being able to handle drivers and sync up drivers with all this stuff. They've cut scope of it's just us behind the scenes, and we're doing a Wizard of Oz style level of magic. Where don't look behind the curtain, right? We're just going to give you this little form, and then magic happens when you submit the form. And how the magic happens can be completely manual. No one needs to know that part of it. And that helps you validate whether or not there's a business here. What are you thinking about, Henry? You're nodding skeptically.
I'm nodding in that there's still magic behind any application. So if you're building software, might have a fancy UI, but there's still magic. So just because it's not in front of the user doesn't mean it isn't still and say, I can solve this problem, white glove. A pitch deck is your MVP. At that point, like your minimum viable product is saying, I have this service idea. Will you pay for it? If they say yes, you're on to version 1. Like right now, I feel like with RepBot, I see the MVP, which was a mistake, and I built version 1. The MVP should just be that, will you pay for this idea? What is the minimum? I thought, okay, it's the minimum viable product, or scope creep all day long until I have something that I think is pretty enough to gain the trust of my users. Okay, but we don't even know if the users want it yet. So we have V1, but we haven't.
And we've now,
the problem exists,
to your thing about, because I would push back on the idea that a pitch deck is an MVP, because like it's very easy, just like in a design software, to just put everything in the kitchen sink. And if you put everything in the kitchen sink into a one piece of software and then say it's $5, but you don't know how much it costs to run that piece of software, how much it costs to build, then you could be giving away money for free.
Yeah.
Like pretty easily. Right, exactly. Whereas if you know how much your time costs,
not a business,
right? Like how valuable this might be for the customer, right? And you do this kind of like consultant concierge approach and then start to build yourself little tools. This is how a lot of companies start. People at big companies build internal tools for them and their teams and then spin them out. There's a really good example of that in a company called Graphite, which makes like a layer on top of GitHub, which is a version control software for software engineers. Makes it a lot easier to do this like one little niche workflow that they at their company were doing, but other companies started to ask them a lot about how they do that and whether or not it would be possible for them to do it too. And they spun out a company, I think from Facebook, to start Graphite. So it's possible to think about using something like Retool, which is a tool to build internal tools, as a tool to build MVPs, because a lot of internal tools at companies are MVPs for startups, right? And there's a lot of Wizard of Oz magic you can do behind the curtain to make this possible. In college, we were taught to do paper prototypes, which at the time I thought was insane. But in a lot of ways, like going into a business meeting with a paper prototype and doing the kind of Wizard of Oz flow does show you a lot about, if you were to do this manually, how you'd have to do it. So it's interesting, could be a thing to explore.